This is To Your Success Radio, sponsored by Design Exchange, with stores in Pewaukee on Prospect in Maine and in Heartland in the Heartbrook Mall. And now your host, Bob Chapman.
Welcome everybody to this week's edition of To Your Success Radio. This is Bob Chapman, and I hope you took something out of the last shows we've had on. You put them in your life, and you've gotten into the game in one form or fashion. I don't want you sitting on the couch and just listening. I want you to get up and do something with what you got here. Now, it's amazing, and I've told people over and over in the almost 2 years we've been on, you don't know what's in your Rolodex till you look. Well, I looked into my Rolodex, and I found a publisher, and she put me in touch with a very interesting author that was local that I would have never met. Had no clue he was just, less than an hour away, Paul?
That's right. Okay,
well, in our studio here we have Paul Colt from Lake Geneva. So welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Bob.
I'm glad you're here. Glad you got in. And what we're going to do is Paul's got a couple of books out. We're going to get through some of the background on this, but one of the things I always like to establish is, how did you become an author, Paul? Was this a burning desire for you, or what happened there?
Well, for many years, Bob, I thought I'd write a book. And I've had a long business career, and I thought for sure it would be a serious business book. You know, I might come up with the next In Search of Excellence or Thriving on Chaos. But that didn't happen.
Okay.
But I did start thinking about a novel. Got some encouragement from a couple of friends, and I thought about it, played with a couple ideas, and finally stumbled on one that I thought would be really interesting. And so that began the journey. And I do consider it a journey. That was about 10 years ago.
Okay.
When the journey started. And I've come through a series of gates, I call them, stages in this process of learning to write and becoming a published author. And it's been a great run.
Okay, well, let's make it greater here. One of the things that constantly jumped out at me is that you like to write about unexpected history. Can you explain to me and the audience what you mean by that? I mean, I everybody has an idea, something pops in their head, but what does it mean to you, and what does it mean to where your writing has gone?
Well, unexpected history is sort of a provocative idea. It's an oxymoron, right? I mean, history is something we know. But I like to find stories that have a little-known or overlooked aspect to them. And those are the stories that I call unexpected history. The first book I wrote was actually the fourth book I wrote. The first book I got published, I should say, was the fourth book I wrote.
You never know what's going to happen in what order, right?
Well, and I got through with the first three, and I realized that there was a story within the story. And so I rewrote those three books, took out the story within the story, and wrote a book called Grasshoppers in Summer, which is the story of the making and breaking of the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868. Most of us are familiar with the events that, for example, led up to Custer's last stand. But we haven't seen the dots connected necessarily through the treaty that was signed 10 years before, almost 10 years before. And so that, for me, was unexpected history, and that kind of gave rise to this idea of unexpected history.
Okay. So would you say that's an ongoing thought process for you? Now, for instance, today we're going to talk about your fourth book, Boots and Saddles, A Call to Glory. Now, that is were the dots connected there for you, too, when we get into the story here of who the book is about?
Yeah, it's a totally different discovery.
Right.
I happen to be reading a book by Jeff Shara on the Normandy invasion. The book's called Steel Wave. And Jeff's a historical fiction writer that I admire. He does historical dramatizations of the sort that I aspire to do. And his book on Normandy spoke about how Eisenhower used George Patton, as a decoy in the run-up to the invasion. And he's had Patton stationed in the north of England with a cardboard army, literally, to draw German defenses toward Calais and away from Normandy. And in that section of the book, he has this throwaway line that talked about Patton having served under Pershing in the pursuit of Pancho Villa. And I went, wow. I mean, I knew about Pershing and I knew a little about Villa. I had no idea that Patton was involved in it. So I said, I got to take a deeper dive. And that started the research for what the book I call Boots and Saddles, A Call to Glory.
Okay.
What I found out really was two stories. The first is that was the turning point that saved Patton's military career. We almost lost him to a mid-career crisis. But Pershing recognized it, took him under his wing, and saved his career. The second part of the story is that was the last United States cavalry campaign. So it's an end of an era. The curtain comes down on the storied American horse soldier, and Patton finds his way to a new future in the 20th century Army.
Okay, so unless somebody was actually a historian who absolutely delved into Patton, he would have not known about the cavalry history, known about Pancho Villa.
We know Patton from George C. Scott's iconic portrayal of him.
Right.
We don't know young George Patton, the 32-year-old second lieutenant cavalry officer, saber master, who was riding around on a horse in Mexico chasing a bandit called Pancho Villa.
That's amazing. That's just amazing to me.
I know I've got an unexpected history story when you do that 1 or 2 sentence conversation at a cocktail party, describe the essence of the book, and somebody says, "I had no idea."
Well, I'd venture to say that probably almost everybody in our audience.
That's
is
why I
saying
hope
that
the
right
book
now.
sells well.
Well, I'm hoping it
continues to
does
sell
too, because
well.
now I'm gonna have to add this to my reading list. I mean, and I have this bad habit, everybody, of jumping into things. So I didn't talk about a couple of things that Paul has done here. I mean, when the book first came out, he received the Marilyn Brown Novel Award. Now that's presented by the Utah Valley University for Excellence, right?
Correct.
And now your first book also received finalist recognition in the Western Writers of America 2009 Spur Awards.
Right.
Okay, now, how did you get into writing the Western, in the Western cowboy genre, Paul?
Well, the first gate on the journey to becoming a writer is decide what to write. And they say, write what you know. I read a lot. Most writers do. And I read a lot of Tom Clancy and Vince Flynn and that kind of stuff. But you really have to be knowledgeable of the trade craft to write that sort of stuff. I grew up on Westerns, and I was lucky enough to do a good part of that growing up on the back of a horse. In fact,
It's always helpful.
I was probably as comfortable on a horse at 9 years old as most kids are on a bicycle. Owned a couple over the years, and so I felt like I knew the West, even though I was a Midwestern born and bred kind of guy. I vacationed on ranches. I know a bit about ranch life, and so I got drawn into a Western set historical story that got me started, and I've just continued on the road.
Okay. Now, when we have a really good show going, it's amazing how fast the time flies, but we're going to get right into this here. You talk about the journey as a writer, Paul. So can you wrap up, can you put those gates into some perspective for us?
I've stumbled onto 5 of them.
Okay.
The first one is, decide what you're going to write, and we've kind of touched on that a little bit. It didn't end up being a business book. It ended up being a Western novel. The second gate is learning the craft. was involved in professional writing my entire business career. I came to the idea of writing a book knowing I could write. Wrong.
Not the right kind of writing.
When I got to the third gate, which is how you get published, I had the good fortune to stumble onto an organization called the Western Writers of America. And I reached out to a half a dozen authors who are members of that group and told them what I was about, and that I was in the process of looking for an agent or an editor, and did they have any advice for me. And 4 of them wrote me back and said, send me some stuff. And they all very politely said the same thing: not ready for prime time.
I hate it when that happens.
Well, one of the things you learn on this journey is you better have thick skin. One of the 4 that came back to me is a gentleman by the name of Dusty Richards. And if you go by the paperback rack in your local supermarket and you look at the Western titles, chances are you're going to find a Dusty Richards novel in there.
Okay.
He's a wonderful contemporary Western writer. And Dusty got back to me and he said, not ready for prime time. I want you to rewrite it, and here's what I want you to do. And after a year of that, I got the craft.
Okay.
And then moved back to that third gate, which is called How Do You Get Published?
Yeah. And then after you publish it, of course, you have to market it. You got to
Exactly.
sell some copies.
Yeah. And the publishing is no small gate to get through. That's
Okay.
a significant part of the journey.
And now, are you at the process, because a lot of our success is about building a business. Now, writing is also building a business for you. It's building your brand.
Right.
So can you just delve into right now in the last 30 seconds before our commercial break, Paul, how does somebody find out about Paul Colt, about where to get the books and stuff like that? That I want to make sure we get in there a couple times for you.
Sure. There are lots of ways to do it. If you can find the book on Amazon.com. I have an author page there. Your local bookstores can order it for you, or your local library will have Boots and Saddles, for example.
Boots and Saddles, A Call to Glory. We have Paul Colt here in the studio, so stay tuned. We're going to have a lot more to cover in the second half. This is Bob Chapman at To Your Success Radio. We're going to pay a couple of bills, and we'll be back shortly.
Hi, this is Mike Vassar. I'm the executive producer of To Your Success Radio, and I want to talk to you about Fisher House, a project that's near and dear to my heart. Fisher House provides a home away from home for family and loved ones of hospitalized military personnel and veterans. Because members of the military and their family are stationed worldwide and must often travel great distances for specialized medical care, Fisher House donates comfort homes built on the grounds of major military and VA medical centers. Each Fisher House is beautifully constructed to serve and honor the families during their greatest time of need. The need for a Fisher House here in our community is great. In fact, 8,000 Iraq and Afghanistan war veterans are currently receiving treatment at the Milwaukee VA Medical Center. Construction of a Fisher House at the Milwaukee VA will enable family members to be close to a loved one at the most stressful time, during hospitalization and treatment for an unexpected illness, disease, or injury. Construction is planned to start in spring of 2014, and your help is needed now. Each home is built through private donations. You can honor our nation's heroes by helping build Wisconsin's first Fisher House on the Milwaukee VA grounds. Please go to fisherhousewi.org to donate and help us build Wisconsin's first Fisher House.
Unique antiques, design exchange, the perfect piece to complement your decor, the perfect place to consign your classics and more. Unique antiques, design exchange.
Upscale, sophisticated, and unique are 3 words that describe Design Exchange.
With 2 great locations, you are sure to find what you're looking for to add style and design to your home. Design Exchange, home decor consignment on the corner of Prospect and Main in Pewaukee and in the Hartbrook Mall in Heartland, or on the web at designexchange.biz.
Unique antiques. Design Exchange.
Okay, welcome back to the second half of To Your Success Radio. This is Bob Chapman in the studio with Paul Colt. I want to welcome Paul back. And we're going to delve right into one of the gates that he mentioned, which is huge, which is the publishing gate, Paul. So why don't you just unwrap that as best you can for us?
Well, the question often comes up, how do you get published? And my answer is painfully.
That's those no's, or is it more than that?
Can you say rejection? I've been rejected by some of the most prestigious publishing houses in the country. For an aspiring writer, when you come to the question of how do you get published, and there's some questions you have to answer for yourself, and that is, what do you want to accomplish? Today, in the digital book world, self-publishing is easy. And a lot of first-time writers opt to go that route. There are traps in the self-publishing game, and some of them are expensive. So you have to kind of be careful of that. I made the decision early on that I wasn't going to do that. If the stuff wasn't good enough for me to sell it commercially, then I didn't want my name on it.
Okay.
So the one thing I did do is I started off in audio. My first couple books were audio books. And that worked out pretty well. I thought that was going to be a way for me to get into print. Audio usually follows print. In other words, a book is published and then it comes out in audio. By going into audio with original material, in a first publication, I had Grasshoppers in Summer was a finalist in the Spur Award competition.
Right.
And I thought that would give my career a big lift, which, well, it helped.
I was going to say, every little bit helps, right? I mean,
it wasn't the lift I was hoping for. When I got to Boots and Saddles, A Call to Glory, I said, this one is going to go in print, period. It took me 3 years to sell it. It was a 9-month assessment period with 5 Star Publishing, the company that brought it out in December. But it was well worth the wait.
Okay. Now, but you've mentioned on it, I mean, part of what you're doing is, I mean, you have to develop the product, which is the writing part, and then get it published, but then you have to help sell some of it, which is what we're doing today, which, I mean, I'm sure you make some personal appearances if people at the Western associations would like, right? I mean,
absolutely.
That's all part of what you do as Paul Colt's brand.
Yeah. When you think about becoming a writer, it doesn't stop at the writing. Now, the days when the publishers did all the marketing are over. All of the publishers expect their authors to be active marketers. And so I'm active in social media marketing. I like to do programs like this, Bob, because it helps to get the name out there. Book signings are great. They don't often sell a lot of books, but, they get your name out there. So those kinds of things absolutely are part of the game these days.
I mean, I think anybody who's walked through a mall, if they've walked through a Barnes & Noble, I mean, they've seen maybe a sign at the front door of it saying, Tuesday night from 7 to 8, Paul Colt's going to be here signing his new book, right? I mean, we've all seen signs like that. Maybe we haven't paid attention, but it is one thing that could help.
Sure,
a little bit.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, I know we've talked a lot about the book you have out right now, but now we have a brand new book coming out. A Question of Bounty, the Shadow of Doubt. Now, when is that coming out, and what's that about? Because the first one was appetizing or whetting an appetite. Fill us in on the unexpected history of this one, Paul.
Well, this is was a fun book for me. It's also going to be a little controversial, I think, because it's the story of a 130-year-old controversy.
Now, controversy can help sell a book, though.
Well, we hope so. A Question of Bounty, The Shadow of Doubt, delves into the death of Billy the Kid. History has it that Pat Garrett killed Billy the Kid. But there's a significant body of testimony, contradictory testimony, procedural irregularities, and unanswered questions that raise some doubts about whether, in fact, that's what happened. The historical record's based on a book that Garrett wrote 2 years after the kid's alleged death, called The Authentic Life of Billy the Kid, in which he cemented his claim of having killed the kid because the printed word in the 19th century reached its zenith in terms of the power of the pen. It's the only media there was.
Right.
And so the historical record that comes down to us today is the record of Garrett's claim. This book is based on the memoir of his deputy who was on the scene at that night and tells a slightly different story. And if you take the differences between John Poe's story and Garrett's story, along with the irregularities and unanswered questions, there's a circumstantial case that says Garrett killed the wrong man and covered it up. And the book, A Question of Bounty, The Shadow of Doubt, explores those events from John Poe's perspective.
You know, John Poe was his deputy?
His deputy,
Okay.
right. Now, I don't draw a conclusion in the book. I leave it to the reader to formulate their own conclusion based on two circumstantial cases, neither one of which can be proven beyond the shadow of doubt.
I have no clue where to go with that because there are so many questions popping into my head, and we probably have a couple of minutes left.
Okay.
But let's just explore a couple of them. Did John Poe, I mean, when you looked at this as an unexpected history, because that seems to be the common thread here that I like to associate with you, Paul, when was John Poe interviewed in relation to the events?
He wrote his memoir subsequent to Garrett's writing his book. He didn't publish his memoir. It was uncovered later. And, you know, some of the procedural irregularities that make the case interesting. In those days, when a high-profile outlaw like Billy the Kid was finally captured or killed, they photographed the body, they photographed the person responsible for ending this outlaw's career with the body. None of that was done in the case of Billy the Kid. The body was, if you will, sequestered and buried hastily the next morning.
Now, was it the body of Billy the Kid that was buried?
Good
Paul
question,
doesn't want to
Bob.
answer that. Let's sell some books here.
No, good question, Bob. You know, those that question Garrett's version of events suggest that it may not have been Billy the Kid. There was a claimant to be Billy the Kid, Brushy Bill Roberts, who showed up in the 30s down in Texas, claimed he was the kid. His claim was subsequently refuted, proven to be a hoax. But there was another individual who passed away in the 30s in Prescott, Arizona, in a nursing home, who circumstantially a lot of people believe might actually have been the kid, that he survived that night, and that whoever was buried in that long ago destroyed grave may not have been Billy the Kid.
So the actual Billy the Kid, let me just get all the pieces right here. He either saw the story or was smart enough to know that, okay, somebody thinks I'm dead. If he wasn't killed, he just basically lived a quiet life then into...
That would... You could conclude that from the circumstantial evidence and hearsay testimonies that are out there. all throughout his outlaw career, Billy the Kid was trying to get a pardon from the governor for his part in something called the Lincoln County War. You might find that book coming out in a couple of years.
There's a lot of unanswered questions in history, aren't there, Paul?
Yeah, and he never could get the pardon. And I can envision he was hiding in the vicinity of the place where Garrett alleges he killed the kid. He was in the area that night. And I can visualize a Mark Twain moment when the kid says, you know what? An exaggerated report of my death is better than a pardon.
Absolutely.
And
in those day and ages, without the internet, without your picture being shown on America's Most Wanted, without everything else out there, you had a picture in a post office or something. Well, if you vanished into the quiet seclusion of a desolate area, right?
Could he have ridden off into the sunset that night? It's possible.
Hence the need for you to find this book, folks, when it comes out. Now, Paul, tell us again, name of the book, when it's coming out, how they can get a hold of that.
Well, the one that you can get right now is Boots and Saddles, A Call to Glory. It's available on Amazon. Your local bookstore can order it. Some local libraries are carrying it or can get it for you. And then if you're a Facebook subscriber, if you like Paul Colt on Facebook, you'll get updates from my friends and family announcements on the availability of a book like A Question of Bounty, The Shadow of Doubt.
Okay, well, I want to thank Paul Colt so much for coming in. This was fascinating because you could do a whole series of shows on just either book, taking it chapter by chapter. But I want to thank Paul for coming in, telling us a little bit more about the publishing and writing industry. Look for his books. Again, this is Bob Chapman at To Your Success Radio. Get up, get off the couch, get in the game of life. Whatever that means to you, get out there and do it, folks. Till next week, bye-bye.